All right, we are live with episode 6 of Everywhere We Belong, and we're here with Ved Shankar, who is our first actual guest. Also, the first actual audio note we got for the previous episode in the community highlights section. And Ved is an actual NRI, so this is exciting times. So, Ved was born in Ranchi but grew up in Dubai most of his life. He went to school there at a place called Dubai Modern High. They later changed their name to GEMS Modern Academy. After that, he went to BITS Pilani, Dubai for mechanical engineering. He graduated in 2018 and after a stint at a robotics startup, pivoted and went to business school. He got into HEC Paris's Masters in Management program in 2019. After that, he worked at Bayer's corporate strategy team for another stint, and he's been job hunting since. In the meantime, he's begun writing a blog on Substack called The Strategy Guild, on which he writes about first principles thinking and strategy aimed at knowledge workers interested in these skills that don't have an MBA. All right, let's cut straight to the chase. When and why did you decide to go abroad, and how did you decide which country to go to?
It's a good question. So why, when I finished my bachelor's, I was struggling to, this is a recurring theme, I was struggling to find a job. And I was also moving, I realized after the robotics stint, I want to move away from engineering. So I was looking for like management jobs, or not management jobs, like business jobs, like sales or business operations. But it's really hard to do that if you didn't come from like a name school. So typically, if you're in Dubai, you want your kids to leave the country and go to the US or UK to get like a good quality education and then come back to get a good job. I didn't do that. I studied in Dubai itself for college, so I knew that this was going to be a pain. So I wanted to leave at some point and get my qualifications.
Fair enough. Okay. And the expectation is that people stay there until undergrad and then they leave and they do their degree stuff and then come back, right?
If the family can afford it, they would ideally want to send their children to the US or Canada. For my batch, most people they split between the US and the UK, but there were also a few who went to Canada.
I see.
And then like a good chunk of them came back also. They came back to Dubai after they got their degrees. So they had better job prospects because they had the international degree.
Right. I'm sure that always makes a difference. Even in the school that I was in, the explicit aim by the time you got to 12th grade was to go west and to go to college there.
For my school, they were trying really hard to push people to go to the Western markets. They were gaming the application process a little bit. But why was I exploring France? Well, I was applying for masters, and initially I was looking at US, I was looking at Germany, and I didn't like the lottery system in the US. Like if you're familiar with the H-1B process and how chaotic it is.
To an extent.
I didn't like my odds.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, let me explore Europe. So I was looking at Germany and France and seeing which programs would let me in.
So that's how
I
you
was
ended
thinking
up
about it.
on HEC?
So like if HEC is one, ESSEC is number two. And I knew a senior who was in ESSEC while I was applying for masters. So I asked him, like, because I didn't know anything about MIM. I just asked him like, hey, what are the top 5 schools for this program? He texted me, these were the names, and I applied, and it's kind of how it worked out.
Fair. I would have assumed that because it's such a prestigious school, it would have been like a rigorous process to decide upon and then apply to.
I think there was a bit of luck. So initially I was still trying for engineering for master programs. So I had the robotics stint, which was also a bit of like it was not officially called project management, but it was almost like a founder office role because I was managing a team and managing the project as well. I think that helped me with my business school application without much planning. In many ways, I got lucky. That's the truth.
Was your family keen on you going once you decided upon it and applied and got in? And what was that conversation like?
I think it was mixed feelings. They knew I was really, like when it happened, I was like, yes, like miracle just happened. More than that.
Naturally.
So they understood that. They knew the prospects in Dubai with just a bachelor's wasn't so great for me right now. So going was almost like a non-question. Like
Yeah.
it was just assumed I was going.
Okay.
I think there was, of course, like, oh, why do you want to leave home? You could just stay. There are colleges here. You could just do your MBA here itself and get some work experience
Yeah.
too. And I'm leaving my friends. So all those things were there, of course, but I had already made up my mind in many ways.
Do you think it was purely because it would give you an academic platform that you couldn't get here, or do you think it was because of a sense of adventure and a sense of wanting to see something beyond the usual horizons?
Both. So on paper, of course, it was a good decision, like career-wise. Um, but I had, so like I said, like I didn't get into a good like university outside of Dubai when I applied for undergrad. So then for 4 years I had like this chip on my shoulder to like get out effectively. Um, so that also like fed into it.
So, what did you study while there?
In HEC. So they're a business school. So they have two programs. They have the Masters in Management and they have an MBA. The MBA is normally for people who have 5 to 6 years work experience, like more like a traditional like HBS or NCR type of MBA. MIM is a little different. It is more equivalent to the MBA here in India, which is you don't need work experience, but it's more or less the same otherwise. And I specialize in strategy. So my specialized degree was also in strategic management specifically.
Why did you choose HEC specifically, and why not the US in this instance?
It was like a carrot and stick problem. Like the carrot side is it was a good school, like it had a very good branding. And the stick is, of course, the US visa system. I think that was a big one for me.
Yeah, makes sense. What differences did you observe between studying in France and Dubai?
I think a big one. So I had like full Indian curriculum. I did ICSC in school, and then I went to BITS. So I was really familiar with it, like the Indian curriculum. Um, France is a little different for a couple of reasons. One is that it was a more international batch. Like there were at least 20 nationalities.
That's great.
Yeah, which is super fun, right? Like
It
you
is.
know, I joke like I learned more in the dining hall than like during lunch and dinner than in class, because you just like talk to people and you learn their stories. I think also like the way the teachers like treat you is different. Like in at least in college, it felt a bit like the teachers were treating you as children, even though you were like 21. Like outside, I think you're treated more like as an adult, so you have to like own your learning in many ways, which isn't a bad thing. I think it's just it takes time to get used to. Oh, and also job hunting. I think for most people who are used to the Indian system, like I know MBAs who were managers in India, but then they come to the MBA program and they're like, oh, I've never really had to like do this much networking and reaching out to people, and because they had campus placements. Maybe that was an exception, but there's clearly a shift that you have to make. So a lot of times you're balancing your, you're not really there to study, you're there to get a job in some
Right.
ways, which is in some way a bit sad because you're more focused on the job hunting than the learning.
The impression that I get is that the further west you go, especially once you're out of India or the Indian system per se, the overall unifying factor is the initiative you have to take. Like even with the studying, it's like if you don't own your own preparation, no one's going to be there prodding you, poking you with a stick, making sure you do it, right? Whereas in the Indian system, there's teachers, there's family, the school will do it, you know. I think considering you went to France, after you're 18, their mentality is like, you're an adult now, you can do it on your own. We're not going to take attendance. We're not going to keep percentages of how often you show up, nothing. If you want to make use of the money that you paid for this, do your best and then look for a job either simultaneously or after. But I had never considered the fact that the job search might take away from the education while it's happening.
Yeah, sometimes it felt uh, that the because there are still like you still have to attend class, like there is still attendance. It depends on the school and the program, but like you have thesis, you have projects, you have group assignments, which are all great. But then if you have like a really important interview that you need to prepare for, and you're doing mock interviews to prepare for it, that's also adding to the strain in many ways. So yeah, you have to like balance that a bit.
I think for an Indian student that does undergrad in the West, it's like being thrown into the deep end, in a sense, because suddenly it's like I have to take initiative for the studying and work. You know, going
Yeah.
from the school just trying to get you above baseline so that you can get into the next grade or whatever. You know.
I think it's good to prepare the like if I was still in school, like let's say if I was 16, I would like probably advise myself to prepare well in advance for the US education system, like learn how to take care of yourself and be independent,
Mm-hmm.
because then it becomes less growing pains when you move. There'll still be growing pains, there'll still be culture clash, there'll still be mistakes made, but it'll just be like a little easier for that kid.
Absolutely. So even outside of just getting ready for the SATs in that instance, it's like also getting ready for the cultural shift, the logistics of living on your own, taking care of groceries, um, all
A
of that
little
stuff.
bit, yeah.
To a lot of kids, when you're in school, the idea of going to either England or the States, especially with the school that I went to, it's idolized, you know, it's mythologized, and kids look forward to it so much. But there's a very real cultural angle of having to suddenly take care of your food, maybe do stuff like meal prep. Because even here, we take it for granted that we can order in whenever we want, eat at restaurants whenever we want. Whereas over there, it's ridiculously expensive comparatively. So even my cousin that went to study in the UK, and after my sister moved there as well, um, there's a huge impetus to know how to cook, and there's a huge impetus to know how
Yeah.
to just take care of simple things like food and taking care of your home, making sure it stays clean, because you can't afford to order in all the time, and you can't afford to have help casually.
That's why I say, like, if you can learn earlier, if your parents are open to you messing around in the kitchen, for instance, uh, it's a good thing.
That sounds so nice. It's idealized though, because like I never took the initiative because it was just too easy here, you know? It still is. I mean, obviously, you still can make the choice, right? I still haven't really, largely. But that's a very, very important skill. You're right.
Yeah, it's a life skill, and it's
It
it's
is.
like the ultimate. Like, since this is a fintech podcast, it's the ultimate financial management skill in many ways.
That's so true. But anyway, how did you bag your first job when you were in France?
Um, so like full time, right? Not the
Mhm.
internships. So I had been applying a lot. I actually didn't take the normal approach with applying. So like typically you would go on job boards and apply like crazy, which is what I'm doing now. But for consulting jobs, you need referrals. This is
That's
more important than applying. Actually, in many ways, you
mm,
need a referral. So I most of my time was spent on LinkedIn getting like coffee chats with people. So I
mhm.
got one referral for Bio, which is where I went to work, um, and that just worked out in the end. I mean, I got the referral, I applied online through the referral, and then gave the interviews.
Right.
Yeah, I actually, when I had interviewed for them, so their office was in Amsterdam, so I went to Amsterdam
Okay.
to give the interviews, and when I passed, I was like, can we just like do the next round like in a day or two? Because I was like primed and ready. I could have just given it then,
Yeah,
but yeah, then I went back to France because I was still finishing my studies,
I see.
and yeah, I mean that didn't work out in the end.
I see. Okay. How long did you spend in Amsterdam?
But I guess like 3-4 days. Yeah.
How was it? Good time?
Yeah, it was nice. It was my third time going to Amsterdam, but this was my first time going solo because I was going for my interviews as well.
Hmm.
So that was also fun. That was like my first proper solo trip in many ways.
So tell me more about the move to Germany and how did you look for jobs there?
I had the job offer, so with that, I moved, and
Right.
it's a big company, so they were sponsoring my visa and everything. And the move was kind of strained because I was in India while I was getting my work visa, and this was 2022, so the Ukraine-Russia war was just like getting started in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really hard to get an appointment with VFS.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm
so
sure.
that took time.
Mm.
Moving there was okay. I missed my flight for the first time.
Mm.
Anything you can imagine can happen in many
Yep.
ways.
Yeah.
But eventually I reached in one piece and s- started the job like immediately, basically.
That's wild. You seem like you read Marcus Aurelius. You give
Yeah, I have it right here.
I had a very strong feeling because there's been some stoic sayings happening during this call. I can tell.
Oh, really? I
Yeah, I
didn't
can
even
tell.
know.
I can tell a Ryan Holiday enthusiast when I meet one, or a Marcus
Oh,
Aurelius enthusiast when I meet one. I am as well.
Ryan Holiday is. I always recommend The Obstacle Is the Way. I think it's a great book when you're going through shit.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like,
Often. Yeah, absolutely. I'm currently reading Ego is the Enemy. So when you were considering the work with Bayer and after you'd interviewed, what were the options in terms of countries you could move to for work? Were there any other options in your mind at the time?
um, yeah, to be honest, like 2022 was a great time to graduate because I had like all the options possible.
Mm-hmm.
I could have like continued applying in France and gotten a job. I could have continued applying in Dubai and eventually get into a firm. I, I had an internship offer from Amazon in Luxembourg, so I
Whoa.
could have gone with that too. Yeah, I mean, it was a great time. But in the end, I decided with Bayer because I wanted the consulting training, but I was just exhausted from applying. So,
Fair enough.
so
Fair enough.
yeah. Sometimes I like ask myself maybe I should have just taken that instead, seeing how things worked out afterwards. But yeah, that was one other option I had.
Mm. I mean, no season is wasted, right? There's always a takeaway.
Yeah.
If you're intelligent enough, no matter what happens, there's always a positive addition and takeaway. If you react to something as difficult as being laid off, and then immediately jump to believing it's like a small piece of paper thrown into my flame, and now I'm going to be ready for the next, and I'm only going to go upwards, people would think you're borderline insane.
Yeah,
And
it's also not healthy. Like, I think
yeah,
my temptation, I wrote a blog about this, but my temptation in the beginning so the job didn't work out, right? So I got fired. My temptation initially was to jump onto LinkedIn and start applying like crazy. But my boss at the time, he told me that, you know what, just like take a week to grieve effectively. My word, not his, but like effectively I needed time to grieve first.
interesting.
Any like huge emotional event like a breakup, losing your job, a family member passes away, or a friend, or even a
Mm.
friend breakup, they all like count in that way. They're all emotionally disorienting events. You're not yourself in many ways. You're like in this state that you can't act rationally, even if you think you are. So it's
Mhm.
really good to take a pause many times and like
Absolutely.
find some balance before you jump into your next thing.
Yeah. Regardless of whether you feel positively or negatively about it, it's just so emotionally impactful. So it's good to take some time to just process whatever
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
It's the counterintuitive thing to do, but you're right. It's the wise thing to do for sure. I was just wondering, what differences did you see between the work culture in France and Germany? What stood out most to you at the
Yeah,
very
like a
least?
very French team, from what I've understood, is they're typically very lax about their lunch hours.
Okay.
Um, like they have the 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 joke is like they have 1 to 2 hour lunch hours. Um, in France, and it's a very people-oriented country, or at least Paris is. It's a very people-oriented city. It's like you need to know people to get things done. A friend told me for one of these brands, I think it's Richemont. It's one of these like luxury brands. His manager, her strength was she was good at politics, so she was very good at like knowing who's the right person to talk to when things are getting blocked in a project, and she knew how to manage those relationships very well, and that's why she was valued in the company. Germany is a little different. There's like the German efficiency. It's not a myth, it's very real. They are extremely effective at getting things done, which is wonderful when you're working with them. They just take care of stuff, um, and very well organized. They're also very respectful of time. The difference between France that way is like they value the time very much, and they respect people
Right.
in the sense like you're not going to have political backstabbing in a German company, at least. This is a bit of a stereotype, but I think that's something you should keep in mind in France. Like you should keep in mind like uh, you need to be able to read the room really well. There's a learning curve again with not just language but reading culture that way.
Right. What I'm gathering is that in your experience with the German work and with the German colleagues, it's sort of you can take them at face value, right? Things are what they seem. It's a bit
Yeah.
more binary and quick and fast moving, and everyone's word is their bond. Whereas with the French, in order to get things done with the same level of efficiency, it's a lot more psychological. You need to know who to speak to, how to speak to them, how to relate to people in a certain way, and that will sort of grease the gears and get things moving.
I think a good example is like the bureaucracy and how to manage it. So like German bureaucracy is very rules oriented. It's like imagine your favorite boomer uncle and you have to like manage around his rules. That's Germany. But for France, that is there, but there's also a way to like slip past it in many ways, and you just need to understand the system and understand who to talk to in some ways.
I see. That makes more sense to someone who's in India. You know, it's less of a cultural shift. Because I think over here, if you know the right people, you can get anything done, right? The country is yours if you know the right people. Whereas in Germany, it's the rules apply to a much higher level and more uniformly. And I speak also from experience. And yes, Germany might be a boomer uncle. If that boomer uncle let you drive your car as fast as it would go, and the
At
roads
least on the highway, yeah.
were amazingly good. Like it's very rule oriented, but also something I really loved about being there was the fact that the rules are only made when they're necessary. You know, it doesn't feel overbearing in any sense. It's like you have your freedoms, but about certain things, you will follow the rules.
Yeah, there's a logic.
Yes.
Like it makes sense.
Did you ever feel sure of whether you'd stay or leave while you were there? And how did you balance long term and short term thinking while figuring it out?
With France, I kind of knew that I was probably going to leave after the masters because my goal was to go into the consulting industry, and the French consulting industry, you need to be a native French speaker. So it wasn't a debate in my head. I just knew I was going to leave. And with Germany, I mean, it was okay. I was also thinking like maybe from Germany I'll go back to France at some point because I just speak French better than German. I mean, it's a hard question to answer about long term because I have no idea. I think it's also the question everyone has when they leave. They're wondering when do I come back or when do I go home or
Will I come
how
back?
do I balance these things? How will I come back? That's a big one. But
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Did you not find yourself pining for either of those places? Did they not make some sort of almost romantic impact on the way you feel, you know, your heart as a place?
I like the French culture in many ways. Like I like the respect for life. I also kind of miss the organization of Germany
I
in
see.
some way. Like I'm in Gurgaon right now, and when I watch people drive on the roads, it's like a constant negotiation process. And I used to drive in Dubai, and in Dubai, like the rules are completely like very well respected. Unless you're Emirati, they go crazy. But otherwise, everyone respects the rules.
Do the Emirati people not respect the rules to a good extent over there?
There was a highway I used to drive to college and like to work, at least around 2018, 2019. It was really common to see like at least one or two Jeeps driving like an Indian driver on the road because it's their country, India.
Interesting. That's very interesting because everything I had heard was that even the accident resolution was so regimented that if someone hits someone else, they just wait for the cops to come. It's not like India.
Again, like that's the exception, but like typically the rules, everything was solid. That's the if that's like something I actually miss about Dubai, like more than anything, is just the fact that the roads were well organized, which is a weird thing to miss,
Yeah.
but yeah.
No, it's not a weird thing to miss. I came back from my short stint in Germany and I immediately had reverse culture shock. And that's such a weird thing to say. You know, it makes you feel like such a hypocrite. But it's like absolutely happened because, I mean, for example, if you go straight from either Dubai or Germany back to Gurgaon and then like some white Fortuner almost drives over your foot as soon as you're back, it's like it's going to remind you of the difference, you know?
Yeah, of
You really
course.
got to watch out. There's like, yeah. Moving on to another section,
Sure.
and this is more regarding identity and the social scene there. Did you ever feel discrimination while in Europe? And if so, could you tell me about an incident that made that obvious?
So, not so much in Germany. When I think about house hunting, which is another big challenge, um, there's always this assumption that if you're Indian, you probably cook a lot of like really spicy gravies in your kitchen. And of course, you leave a mess, and there's like a huge smell in the house, which I think landlords, they've had a bad experience with some Indians.
Okay.
So they're a little bit more nervous to let Indians rent their places. That's just one thing I think across France and Germany I noticed. There's this assumption that I'm going to destroy their house. uh, but in France, one time, I think I told a landlord that I'm Indian and she cut the call. But it was like one instance where this like happened. Otherwise, normally it's been okay. Job hunting wise, it is quite difficult because it's not racism necessarily. It's actually more like a law. Like companies need to consider the EU citizens first before they can consider a non-EU candidate. Uh, so this makes it more. This makes it not impossible. It just makes it challenging. I think I think if you're Indian and you're in Europe and you don't speak French or German or any of the local languages, depending on the country you're in for a ride. Like compared to your European batchmates, because they're
Yeah.
gonna have it a little easier.
It's some pretty questionable chances, you know, unless you have a relative there with a firm or something like that. It's it sounds tough. I didn't realize that the preference was for EU citizens. I thought it would be much more country specific, but they've formed legislation that favors the EU citizen, the European citizen, multiple countries.
There's always layers to this. If we're talking about racism, it's not as bad as in Dubai, for instance. Like, I
Okay.
think Dubai is much worse.
Is it because of the perspective of Indians there and the job roles associated with how people
Salary.
perceive Indians or salary?
Depends on the company, but at least 5 years ago, the case was that your salary depends on the passport you have. This is not the case for, like, let's say a consulting firm, but
Okay.
I think for the consulting firms, their thing is no, I don't think it's a thing in consulting firms, but like for like normal companies, I think that's a factor. There's also the whole Emiratization drive that's been happening for the last 5 years again. I saw a job ad just yesterday for EY Partner, and they were like, we're only looking for Emirati, not even Lebanese or Egyptian, Emirati.
I
But
see.
that's the trend.
That's the trend
That's
happening
these
everywhere.
companies will go.
Speaking of language barriers and cultural shifts, how did you pick up the necessary level of proficiency for studying in France and work in Germany?
So I studied French in school, but I didn't learn French. Like you learn school French in school. You don't actually learn the language. So
Yeah,
before the masters,
this is true.
I was a little older, so I knew like how I like to learn and teach myself things. I'm also a nerd about learning, so I read a book called Ultra Learning by Scott Young, which talks a bit about deliberate practice. And basically, if you're learning any skill, you need to keep in mind the context that you will use that skill for. So, like, if you're language learning, keep in mind firstly what skills are you using in the language, because language learning is really broad. The way I was approaching it, I was thinking, okay, well, I want to be able to talk to people, I want to be able to listen in French, and I want to be able to read the news. Those are basic things.
Right.
And I was doing an internship as a data analyst, and I luckily had one colleague who was French. From day zero, like from scratch, I was trying to like talk to her in French. Of course, I explained like I'm learning the language and I'm trying to practice.
Right.
So she gave me some time to do that. I also like listen to, instead of like just reading grammar books and phrase books, which is what you do in school, I was listening to an audio course, like a free French audio course that you can find on any podcast app called Coffee Break French.
Okay.
So that's really good too, because they make you practice speaking. You know, the French sounds are different from English, so you have to
Yes.
like get your mouth to get used to those sounds.
Absolutely.
I also did a French course just like as an addition.
Fair. The inflection is different. The shapes that your mouth is required to make for French vastly different to get the pronunciation right. There's like this sort of back of the throat sound that figures into a lot of their words. English is a very front of the mouth kind of thing, you know?
I know like for the R, like the French R, you need your throat. You need to go like R.
Exactly.
It's almost like a H.
Yeah.
And French is actually two languages.
How do you mean?
So the written language is different from the spoken, and this is only with French. It's not there with Spanish or Italian. It's only with French or even German. What you read is different from what you hear. For example, the word for bird, the word, if I pronounce it, is oiseau.
Okay.
Okay, now when I say the word vaso, you would think it's WAZO, like
It's OISEAU, right?
yeah, yeah, and that happens a lot in the language.
Yeah, it's just a non-intuitive way of spelling anything. It's fun though. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I like French spelling. It's very aesthetically pleasing, I find, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
it is. It's a more lyrical language, like especially when you're connecting the words and making a sentence. Suddenly things squish. If you're learning spoken French, it's different from written, which is the failure with school. School's mental model to teach languages is the same way you learn math,
Yeah.
which you can't do.
Yeah. If I'd taken all of the time that I spent in French in school and I'd transferred it somehow magically to my guitar practice time, I would be a virtuoso. I would have had 10,000
Yeah.
hours. Instead,
Yeah.
I have very, very questionable French skills. It was interesting though.
But you still have a base zero, so it's not for nothing. The thing about school is it really like drills down the basics of grammar to you.
There will be a base level of intuition if I ever do go back here.
Yeah.
In your experience, and I know you didn't spend too much of your childhood here in India, but do NRIs seem to have a false perspective of India? Do they romanticize it or do they put it down beyond the truth of this nation?
So it depends on the NRI. Like if they just left the country, they of course have like their own viewpoint of where they grew up rather than the whole of India. But they still have an accurate picture of where they're from.
Okay.
And if they're NRIs who grew, like I grew up outside, right? So this is a bit of a different case. It really depends, like how the parents raised them or their surroundings. I was in an Indian school, so it wasn't that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I'm a bit naive of how India works. Like I remember when I was 13, I was being told about the growth story in India and how it's like the fastest moving economy and all these things.
Right.
But then I was asking one of my school teachers, like, so what does that mean? Because I see a lot of homeless people and beggars on the street. So how does that reality fit with the storyline that's being sold? So he said, like, yeah, there are a lot of problems in India. Like, it's not that. Like, he was very somber about it that way.
Right. How do people make friends in France as opposed to Germany? Do they use apps and groups to do that? How is it different
Mm.
between the two countries, and how do you contrast that against how that happens in India culturally?
So in France, I think France, it was really easy for me to make friends because I was studying there. That's the
Mm.
first thing. But I also made friends outside my campus, like outside my school, and that was mainly friends of friends.
Right.
The fun thing about Paris is that if you know one person, they'll know someone else, and there'll be like some kind of connection. You'll probably know a bigger group of people if you know at least two to three people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
People will hang out, like meet up for dinners. You, they'll invite some of their other friends, and then the groups will kind of like mesh and mingle, and yeah, that's nice. There's a lot of serendipity there.
That's really nice. I mean, if the circles overlap, that's always fun, you know?
Yeah,
Nothing feels
it does.
contrived. It just happens.
It just happens. Um, Germany on the like Cologne on that side is a little different because it's not as international.
Okay.
So the main way I was trying to make friends was through my colleagues because my team was young and more international that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess the best way is through sports. Like you
I see.
join sports clubs, or maybe you go to. I like rock climbing, so when you go to the
I see.
climbing gym, you just talk to people on site, and yeah, you can
Mm.
go for dinner after that.
Mm. I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that thing about the rock climbing? Someone just walked in.
So I was saying, like in Germany, the easy way to make friends is to go for like sports. So I was giving an example with rock climbing. So you meet different people. Maybe if you go for a group class also, and then you just if you're going there regularly, you're going to make friends eventually.
Mm. Contrasting those, which would you say is more similar to India in terms of making friends and anything else?
I think France,
Okay.
because I think with France, it's very much based on your circle that you have. That's why it's easier if you've studied here. So
Mm.
based on your circle, you meet other people,
Yeah.
and I think it's similar, at least in the big cities here. Like based on the circle of friends you have, you meet other people as well. It's not as closed off, or at least that's what I would assume.
Mm.
So yeah, I would say France.
Solid. Moving on to our next section, which is NRI personal finance. What was your budget distribution like while abroad?
So in France, I don't really remember. In Germany, because I didn't have that much money, to be fair, as a student. So I was like, okay, I paid rent, I'm fine now, more or
Yeah.
less. And I didn't, because of COVID, right? So I wasn't going out that
Yeah.
much. So I wasn't spending that much money.
Right.
Yeah. And Germany, that's when I was like budgeting and keeping in mind like salary. So I was keeping my rent to around 30 to 40% ish.
I see.
Um, and then like that's like the biggest expense. So after that, like just managing with everything else.
Makes sense. Did you ever find yourself converting the French and German currencies into what you'd spend in dirhams if you were back in Dubai?
Because it's so expensive in comparison. Like in Dubai, I wasn't spending money at all in many ways. My budget was super low. But like going to France, I had to like increase my budget and spending just because of where I was staying. And Paris is an expensive city
Yeah,
to live. It's great student life, but it's still super expensive.
I'm
So
sure.
you kind of have to like shut it off in many ways. You have to like get used to what is normal to spend in the city itself. At least that's how I was thinking about it. Because otherwise you're gonna go crazy.
Yeah, I think it's a much healthier perspective to just understand a reasonable level of expenditure where you're at, as opposed to comparing it to India, because it'll drive you out of your mind if you compare it to rupees.
Yeah,
Because you'll have like a smoothie and it's like 7 euros or something, and you'll be like, I'm gonna like this is ridiculous compared to how much I would spend on a back home. Because
yeah,
here
of course.
it's like 80 rupees. So,
I had that trouble in Dubai actually, because in Dubai, like, you had a lot of people coming from Europe and US.
mhm.
Um, so for them, everything is affordable, and so the restaurants increase the prices to suit their requirements. So being local,
That's upsetting.
uh, well, I was just confused. I was like, who's paying 48 dirhams for a milkshake or a coffee or a sandwich? I'm like, I would see these prices in these like they're not even fancy. They were like normal places, but they were super expensive. Like, who can afford this? And then I realized, oh wait, it's for the Western crowd.
Interesting, because I saw reviews of like food that people would buy on Talabat or something, and it was like really good prices comparatively, and like well sourced ingredients and stuff, and I was just like shocked. It seemed like the UAE really has a good food scene, and it's like you can
It's a
get
mix.
cuisines and
Yeah, for sure. But it's a mix. It depends on the area you live in Dubai.
I'm sure. What was your primary mode of spending while in Europe? And how did you spend when you visited India during that period?
Mode of spending. So in France, primarily card. Like I had my French bank card, and later I also got Revolut. So I had those two cards. And in Germany, it was primarily my German card and cash, because German they're very cash dependent.
Right.
In Germany, it's like the opposite of India that way. Um, yeah, that was my main way of spending.
Okay. Makes sense. How did you spend when you visited India during that period to see family?
I did. So again with COVID, I visited once. No, I went home twice. The first time was pre-COVID. The second time was post-COVID. But I didn't spend money. I
Mm.
just went home, like, basically.
That makes sense. I mean, when you come back to India, you're gonna get the best food at home. You're not gonna spend anything. If you have family, you're gonna want to spend time with them. It's the opposite of a cash-intensive holiday, is coming home to family in India.
Yeah. Also, again, I don't have friends here, so there was no one to meet,
Fair. So it's just family then.
pretty much.
That's the least cash-intensive, which is fantastic. Um, did you invest or save while in Europe? And what was your investment breakup like if you did?
Yeah. So I was learning about personal finance while I was doing my internship. So I was putting like a little bit of money from the salary. It was still
Mhm.
like a okay salary, so I could invest some.
Awesome. Yeah.
And savings, I mean, student salary, I mean, it wasn't much for savings. But for the job, I was keeping like, the thing was, I was first paying off loans, and then like I started uh, building my emergency fund, which
Hmm.
I didn't expect to break almost that soon.
Hmm.
So I didn't really save that much, unfortunately.
I see. I see what you mean. What was the one worst mistake you made with money as an NRI?
Like when you're emotional distress, you should not make decisions.
Yes.
Um, so I think I made two mistakes. One, one was a bit of context. My program has a gap year where you're like trying to do internships and work for a summer or like
Right.
for a year. So that was taking a while, and it's like a recurring story for me. It just job hunts take time, and I remember I signed up for a French course and it was really expensive, come to think of it. But I was like, I need some form of structure, like
Mm.
external structure, because I don't know what I'm doing with myself apart from
Yeah.
job hunting.
Hmm.
So that was not I would not recommend doing that again because it was expensive and not effective.
I see.
Um, and another expensive thing I did was when I lost my job, I started like reading again.
Okay.
But that also means I was buying a lot of books. And like if you're buying one or two books, that's fine. Like you can get by. But I was buying like 20 books at a time. So
Whoa.
yeah, I had to like disconnect my card from my Kindle, like my Kindle app, because I was just going. Yeah, I was like an intense. I'm still an intense reader, but like I was going through like an intense period of reading, because I was like, what went wrong? I need to like figure it out. So I was reading about psychology, philosophy, business, and trying to like figure out like what went wrong in some way.
I mean, as far as retail therapy goes, I think buying a million books is not the worst way you could go about it.
No, but it's still like not. I like I follow Ramit Sethi. He's a personal finance influencer. He has this rule where he's like, my rich life is where I can buy like unlimited, like I have an unlimited budget for books. In theory, this is great, right? This is awesome. But in practice, that's really expensive.
Yeah, it is. You want nice books, it's expensive. All right, this is my final question before we move into the rapid fire section. And it is, why did you decide to come back to India, or why were you forced to come back to India? And where do you plan to be in the future?
So it was more need based, because uh, so if you're job hunting and you don't get like the um, money for job hunting,
Mhm.
you're it's all out of pocket. So in my case, it was all out of pocket. So it was just getting expensive, and the hunt was getting prolonged. So I moved here to take a break, also like continue the hunt.
Mhm.
And what was the second question?
Where do you plan to be in the future?
I have no idea. It's actually a really hard question.
It
Like
is.
um, every country has its pros and cons, but I haven't been to every country. And there are still some countries I would like to explore and see like what's living there like.
Mhm.
Um, for instance, like Singapore, or other countries in Europe. Like I've only been to France and Germany. There's I don't think I would live in Denmark. It's too cold, and I don't
Mhm.
want to. I don't think I want to live there. Um, but yeah, I have no idea.
Fair. That's a completely fair answer to that question. I think a lot of us aren't entirely sure, you know. Moving into the rapid fire section, and these answers are to be limited to 45-second answers. Question number one: if you had a magic wand, what would you immediately change about India? One thing.
Stop being so Darwinian.
Okay, just briefly, what do you mean by Darwinian?
The thing about India, at least for middle class or upper middle class, is it's a cutthroat way to live
Yeah.
and a cutthroat mindset, right? So like if you've gone to BITS and IIT, for example, it's not enough. You have to go to IIM. If you've gone to BITS, IIT, IIM, that's not enough. You have to go to BCG, McKinsey.
For sure. I know what you mean. Um, question number two: what's the most European thing about you after you spent your time there? Did you pick up any of their quirks?
So I used to be very career focused and make my decisions just purely on career. Now I think more about life first before making career decisions. Like
Mhm.
life questions first, then career questions. So I think I
I
got that from Europe.
Question number three: what was the strangest thing you ate abroad?
I ate a brain.
What brain?
I think it was a pork brain in one of these hot pot places. This was again in, I think it was in Amsterdam. Yeah. So these Chinese
Interesting.
hot pot places, one of the food was a brain, and I tried it out.
How was it?
It's surprisingly bland. So there's no flavor. So all the flavor comes from the sauces you put on it.
I see.
And it's very soft and kind of jelly, which makes
Okay.
sense.
Okay, question number four. What's changed most about India since the first time you visited and now?
I'm just noticing things have become a little bit more bougie than before in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Bougie, like, I get a lot of ads on Instagram for like coffee making classes and stuff, and I'm like, who's the customer for this? Or the fact that you can have Ed Sheeran Coldplay concerts that are insanely expensive, and you question like who can pay for this. So there's an influx of, maybe it's NRIs who are just traveling to India, but I have a feeling like the 1%, they've just became more and more powerful
Yeah.
and more money. So it's like the market has opened for them now in India. Before they
Yeah.
just had to fly out.
India's a good place to be rich. It's a very, very good place to be rich.
Yeah.
Um, All right, question number 5. What changes to India would convince you to move back for good?
Um, that's a good question. Um, Maybe if the rupee was as powerful as the dollar. But the big one for me is like more openness to remote working culture. I think remote working culture should be adopted more in India compared to even like the States or Europe.
Fair enough, it makes sense. Logistically, it's a task to get around, but do you feel like it's effective in terms of productivity, not being physically around your colleagues?
So the mistake people make with remote culture is they think they can operate the same way, just they happen to be working through Zoom. That's
Yeah.
actually not effective. That's like the same way as you're doing school as 90-minute lectures but online. It doesn't work. Um, you need to like adopt, like companies, if they want to adopt remote culture, they need to adopt the policies of a high performing remote company. So if they study companies like 37 Signals or Levels, these are all remote companies, but they are market leaders in their space. So that's, you know, then you can expect to get the benefits of the productivity gains and the benefits of the remote culture gains as well, because there are some great things about remote culture from a productivity standpoint.
I'm sure. It's a very interesting perspective. Definitely want to be explored. But that brings us to the end of this conversation and the end of the rapid fire section. And it's been fantastic. Thank you, Ved. This has been the first episode with an actual NRI. It's been good talking to you the last few weeks preparing for this and just
Awesome.
generally making friends. So thank you.
Yeah, welcome. It was fun.
It was a good one. Thanks a lot, Ved.